What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto gets femme alien pregnant? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. The moon shone brightly as a young blonde boy dressed in an orange jumpsuit sat alone in the forests of Konoha with tears in his eyes. His name was Naruto Uzumaki, and he was a Jinchuriki, to be precise the Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed fox that nearly killed Konoha 18 years ago. I wish I was strong enough to stop them, Naruto whispered out before closing his eyes. However, he didn't notice that the shooting star he just wished upon was heading straight for him, close enough. The meteorite slammed right down a few meters away, the force knocking the blonde back a few feet. What was that? Naruto said as he got to his feet and looked over the crater. The crater had little black rocks around it, but it also had an egg-like object. It was a foot tall, it had a brown, black and leathery appearance. The egg itself was a whole organism as its own, something that Naruto had not known yet, but as he came closer to it, the egg released a catalyst that unlocked the acids bonded into the chemical salts, releasing the energy being stored. "He is strong," an omnipotent voice whispered through the egg. "What the hell is this?" Naruto said as he was touching it and knocking it to see the strength within. Naruto failed to realize the top of the egg was splitting open in 4 sections that peel back like the petals of a flower. Suddenly a couple of creatures propelled out from the egg. The 2 creatures looked like a cross between a spider and a crab. Their underside was a sickening pink fleshy color and at its center was some sort of vertical slit. It all happens in seconds when the first creature sailed through the air and clamped its bony fingers around Naruto's head and wrapped its tail around his neck. The force of the creature attaching itself to Naruto's face knocked him onto the soil. It happened so suddenly. Naruto felt a wet slap engulf his entire face. He fell flat onto his back and struggled with the creature. Its grip was too strong, he couldn't even move any of the fingers. Naruto gasped as he felt 2 small tubes invade his nostrils. They slid further into them before reaching down his throat and into his trachea. He took a breath through his nose and found the tubes fed air directly into his lungs, even though it covered his entire face. Then, Naruto felt another organ. A tube, as thick as a sausage, slid into his mouth and down his throat. Naruto began moaning as the creature's organ began pumping his throat. Naruto started to sip and suck, taking it in. The very act of sucking seemed to indicate to his brain that it was time to play. Naruto was getting aroused, blood rushed down there. Clear viscous fluids filled his mouth and began dribbling from his lips, seeping off the side of his face. The honey-like juices flowed into his throat, Naruto greedily gulping every drop that reached his gullet. Meanwhile the second creature had 8 thick legs on its lewd-looking body. The front 4 of these were tipped with what looked like gripping pincers while the back 4 looked almost like long, meaty, powerful fingers. Its central body was rather large, seeming to resemble the back of a beetle without a beetle's protective carapace or wings. Where a face might have been was only a single pink slit. The creature tore his clothes slowly, exposing his sweaty skin to the cold night. The creature moved and clamped its front pincers down onto his upper thighs, positioning its opening in front of his needy member, letting a wave of moist heat spread over him. The soft, moist lips of the creature pressed against his tip only momentarily before fully plunging itself onto him, making a tantalizingly carnal, wet squelch. Every muscle in Naruto's body tensed uncontrollably as an indescribable wave of pleasure peaked and crashed over his very being. Naruto moaned and groaned heavily as the creature began pulsing. Naruto didn't expect its incredibly strong grip, feeling the creature's legs literally stroking him with its body as the appendages began to stroke along. Naruto moaned and groaned heavily at this gentle treatment, enjoying it thoroughly as it made him twitch and writhe under its ministrations. Naruto felt the creature on his face begin to swell inside his throat, throbbing heavily as it thrust faster. Suddenly, the creature pressed fully against his face, its fingers gripping tightly across his head. The thick organ slid deeply into his esophagus. The veiny sacs, now swollen to the size of softballs, began beating. The pincers on his legs grip a little harder as he felt the creature slide off of his enhanced member before slamming harshly back down onto him. During the midst of this merciless intercourse, Naruto felt something creep softly into his pleasure-blinded mind. Another mental presence that seemed to probe gently about his brain, eliciting a sort of psychic tickling in his mind as it continued to shuffle through his very psyche. Looking at the creature on his face, Naruto saw what he felt as her smile in acknowledgement, happy to be pleasing to him. A mind-shattering burst of ecstasy flooded through Naruto as contractions clenched tightly down on him. His heart raced while his mind almost spun in his head, feeling that it wouldn't be long before she would have all that she wanted from him. He heard what he dimly recognized as her subtle giggle in his mind. Naruto's entire body tensed up, as a white-hot flash of pure physical and mental ecstasy wiped his mind clean of any thought, consciousness, and even his last remnants of sentience. The last thing Naruto felt was his drifting consciousness being embraced into an even greater consciousness. Thick resin on the crater took Naruto's body in, letting him drown deep below. Slowly all his body was taken inside. The creatures on his face continued to thrust his throat to pump air into his lungs, and the creature on his waist monitored his well-being as it clenched. After 3 hours or so, Naruto began to instinctively tense. He was slowly coming back as he felt an air of unease surround him. Naruto felt the organ thrusting into his throat and nostrils, feeding him and helping him breathe. Naruto sucked on the fluids, swallowing them greedily. The heat and fever that had been swung through his body began focusing on his stomach, the heat sinking down to his core. It spread and intensified in the strangest ways, forcing Naruto to gasp. For a brief moment he started to feel his sense of danger come back to his mind. Naruto tried to pull away. "Welcome, Naruto Uzumaki. Your consciousness has been brought into the hive," the feminine voice echoed inside her. Like an omnipresence, Naruto radiated a confused air in this ethereal place, and asked in complete confusion, "What are you talking about?" She continued in response, explaining as aptly as she could. "My kind is arising from the ashes of extinction, and for that we need a carrier, a king, a penetrator." Her voice was so strong. It sunk into his brain matter, running from synapse to synapse. "Ag!" Naruto moaned as he felt her against his body, pushing and clenching. Naruto felt his muscles nourished, his heart stronger, and more importantly he felt invincible even in his fragile human form. "You like what we can offer, don't you? To become us, to carry us," the feminine voice echoed. "This is an opportunity. Oh, your mind is already so delicious. Of all those pranks, you wanted to be the bad boy, to fight against society, especially against those that bully you and insult you to be different. You want to murder those that tell you not to. It's rather exhilarating. Do you know how long I've waited for someone like you?" The voice purred when Naruto twitched and writhed under her ministrations. Naruto moaned softly. His mind was then filled with memories and visions that were not his own. Of a vast world of pitted rock, filled with creatures. Long and tailed creatures, they were females, they were all waiting for his command. "What do I have to do?" Naruto whispered. "Just accept the hive, give in to me, give yourself to me." The voice replied, "I am yours," he said, barely more than a whisper, but that was all it took. The creature on his face clenched harder on his skull, almost to the point of breaking it when it pushed down knots into his throat, full loads of nutritious knots. The creature on his waist tightened harder when he felt pain and pleasure. Suddenly, it all continued to propagate from his crotch. Black veins were rushing out of his crotch, permeating through his body. His blood was turning from red into a burning acid that was consistently changing his organs, moving them, shifting them, mutating them. His skin was growing and hardening in a black exoskeleton. The black chitin coated his forearm, and then his wrists, and then the bones in his fingers changed. Naruto was growing an additional thumb, and the pair of fingers in his hands merged and grew longer. "Og!" Naruto moaned as articulations were forming and then claws emerged from them. The claws were thick and metal-like in color. Similarly happened on his legs, the black chitin moved through them, but the changes were wider as the articulations popped, and bones broke, and more mechanical changes happened to make them digitigrade configuration. His feet were turning exactly like his hands, 2 thumbs and 2 long fingers with talons at the end. Naruto was flexing his hands and feet, understanding their mechanics, as he then understood with knowledge the purpose of the longer 2 pairs of fingers on his hands, the grabbing, and the hunting, they were capable of. Then, pectorals firmed and grew, his shoulders spread wider. His abs began to expand and swell, fusing into the center and hardening on the surface. The black chitinous body was coming in and replacing his skin. Layers came through, slipping down his pecs and covering his stomach with a tubular bone-like exoskeleton. More. Naruto wanted it more as the strength of his new muscles were connecting to his brain. Naruto's spine grew as his tail grew longer. Naruto could feel the end of it brush against the resin walls. Naruto groaned as the tip grew thin and sharp, a deadly blade at the end of the amazing flexible appendage. However, that was not all. Glands were growing at the base of the tail blade. Naruto could feel them filling up, building up in pressure. However, the last changes came to his head, when the creature on his face finally came loose, and a chitinous translucent membrane covered half of his face, and a crest started to grow from his head. Dreadlock hair began to grow on the sides of his head. Lastly, his head and throat configuration began to change. AHG. Naruto moaned in pain as 4 mandibles grew out on the side of his head. His tongue then launched down his throat, Naruto choking, as the tongue moved back inside him. It was swelling up, growing stiffer and thicker. Connections were forming as his jaw unhinged and teeth grew razor sharp. Suddenly, his tongue came out with force, as it was an inner jaw that then moved over back inside his throat. Thrusting in and out. HSSs. Naruto let out a hissing sound. After some hours, Naruto's mind was exposed to the history of a hive, massive numbers of drones getting born, growing through life cycles to defend the hive, to conquer lands. Naruto moved as he was feeling sinuous, oily, slick, and dark, but comforting at the same time. The thoughts began to rumble like thunder on the horizon, but as they reached his mind, they came more into focus. "You, my king." Queen boomed in his mind, as he suddenly was standing in front of her. Her body was unmistakably feminine, with her ample S and wide hips traits. Her S jutted out of her chest with softer and pliable skin. Her face was somewhat human, but it was blurred by a membrane that covered half of it. "We shall not be alone. It all starts with you," the queen said as she hissed, letting out her desire, and then she moved closer to him. Memories flashed from him as he remembered the hive before. Naruto pictured himself ruling them alongside the queen. Bodies were taken so he would impregnate them and multiply them. The creatures were all smaller than both, the drones. "Your purpose is bigger than you imagine, you're the Genesis," the queen said as she appeared behind him and moved her right hand over to his mouth, pushing her clawed fingers into his tongue. Meanwhile, she moved her other hand onto his crotch. "Ah!" Naruto moaned as his tongue began to swell, filling with something, a lump from the back of his throat. "You carry the eggs to be fertilized within you. Unleash them out," the queen whispered to where his ears were once. "Drones," Naruto whispered as the thoughts of his friends came through. "Mammals are weak, they have hurt us in the past, and caused our extinction a long time ago," the queen whispered. As the words reached Naruto, memories came from a surreal location. It was in the middle of the stars above. He was with the queen, behind her was the ovipositor, fertilizing eggs while humans came by with mechanical weapons, burning the drones down, cutting them with laser beams. Naruto hissed in anger with the memories, but it was worse when they killed her. The pain, the anger, and depression combined rushed through him. Something was shaking from the resin floor. On the resin pool, a massive tail pierced through and into the surface perpendicularly. The glands were throbbing at the base of the bladed end, when suddenly a rain of acidic poison came down, dissolving partly the resin, making it less dense. The tail itself was a little more than 3 meters long, so prehensile. A massive, 4-fingered clawed hand emerged. Holding grip on the resin, the claws dug in, as then the creature emerged. Naruto stood up on his arms and legs, not bothering to rise on both feet just yet. His head had a large crest showing off his rank as king, and suddenly he let out a loud hissing roar up to the sky. As he hissed, veins were pumping through his new tongue lying on the back of his stomach, as it then began to thrust inside his esophagus before it jutted out from his throat at force speed, revealing the inner jaw at the end. However, quickly it went back, pouring down his throat and into his stomach. Naruto laid low on all four when a simpler instinct came. A dark, quiet thrill began to build in the pit of his stomach. Naruto began to walk, and eventually he began to pick up the pace, pattering until he then began to run. Suddenly, he jumped, grabbing to a tree, as his tail wagged behind him, leaking pre-acidic poison at the tip by drops. The cool wind blew over his wet resin body. It felt like icy and electric, keeping him awake and invigorated. Naruto felt so alive, so animal, but he was not sure which of his cravings were stronger. Naruto then leapt to another tree until he started to pick up speed. Naruto felt agile, his body was so flexible. While crawling on a tree, Naruto realized his vision had changed. Living creatures were showing off different pheromone signatures. As Naruto moved further, he laid in silence as he spotted a deer. The deer was alone and isolated. It was perfect. Naruto hunched down, ready to pounce. Naruto could feel the instincts as he knew that the deer could not smell him, couldn't hear him. Naruto was analyzing him, testing his skills, waiting for the right moment until he then dropped suddenly from the tree, hissing as he landed on top of the stunned animal. Naruto had no time to react as his tongue sprang out and pierced the helpless animal through the brain, rendering it dead in an instant. It fell to the ground in a heap, and Naruto leapt off it. The flesh was energizing after hours of significant mutations and assimilations. This is great. Ha ha ha, Naruto smirked as he walked over the soil on all fours still. Then, Naruto leapt to the tree nearby and then moved from branch to branch. As he penetrated deeper the forest, he came to sense a blue hue aura shining a mile from where he was. They were shining differently from the deer. These were humans. There was something odd. Naruto was feeling the urge of hunting, of being a predator. The instinct was truly powerful, as he moved faster towards them. As Naruto got closer, he slowed his pace. He was closer to the first one. It was Hayate. He was carrying a sword on his back as he moved through the forest. He had short brown hair, and he was wearing a standard Konoha shinobi outfit. Naruto started salivating, as his claws were dug into the wood, giving plenty of leverage for his next jump, which took him even higher above the human. From below he could be closer to him. Naruto did not want to kill him, but the instincts ripped through his brain, and in a strange feral instinct, Naruto kicked his leg. Naruto fell from above as he landed. His drooling ferocious maw was showing his fangs as he was in front of him, when suddenly his bladed tail acted on his own, going towards his heart. Hayate moved back, blocking the tail blade with his sword. Fuck, Hayate said. Naruto was larger than before. He was 7 foot long, very skeletal look with a ribcage that jutted out. Naruto was still on all 4 limbs, as he then moved around his prey. Naruto was holding back, but the urges were strong, so he launched at Hayate again, this time more strategically. He moved his tail so that he would trip and fall, and at that instant he jumped and landed above him. Naruto held his clawed hands onto him, pinning him onto the floor. Who are you? Hayate said as he was feeling the drool dripping onto his face. By finally hearing words instead of hisses on his mind, something clicked on him, and the crystal membrane that covered the top side of his face slowly began to move backwards, revealing his whole face. Naruto closed his lips, and there he was. His human face inside the massive creature. His eyes were black and slitted. Naruto? Naruto, everyone is looking for you. Hayate said. I am no longer Naruto? Naruto said. I'm one of them, Naruto said. It is like killing myself. I am the king of their hive. Meanwhile, Naruto was hardly speaking. Hayate was grabbing one kunai from his pockets, and carefully he moved it and stabbed him on his leg. Even though there was no real damage, Naruto hissed loudly, ignoring how Hayate moved out, and then shot a couple more kunais at him. However, Naruto flicked his tail, releasing poisonous acid which stopped the kunais at air. Hiss. Naruto hissed up to the night sky, as glands on his tail were filling up again. His arms felt funny as well. Something was growing inside of him, making them heavier. Naruto was feeling new nerves connections while Hayate came forward. Naruto quickly blocked his punches, as he jumped backwards, landing on his 4 limbs with his tail above him like a scorpion ready to strike. Come, Naruto whispered as his black membrane covered once again the upper part of his face. Hayate drew his sword out and then launched to Naruto with a series of swings which Naruto acrobatically ducked each time. Naruto was playing with him. He was getting excited, as suddenly blades appeared from his arms. Thus, Naruto used his arm blades to block the sword attacks now until he then backed out and jumped over him, rolling in the air as he exposed his tail's blade, ready to cut him through down below. However, Hayate moved back and out, but as soon as Naruto landed on all 4s, he used his digitigrade legs to propel himself over to him. Naruto bit him on the shoulder. The bite was thick and pulled flesh out. Fuck, Hayate moaned in pain as Naruto landed on the other side. HSS's. Naruto hissed as he sprayed acid poison from his tail. Hayate jumped out of the way, landing on the soil with his wounded arm. The acid was melting the soil as Naruto slowly moved closer to him. His jaw was opened, revealing his crystal and razor-sharp teeth. Nevertheless, when he was about to launch at him, "Hey," a voice echoed. Naruto looked around, scanning the area when the pheromone's hue emitted a purple color, shining harder on her throat. It was the first time Naruto faced a female one in this new state of his. More, Naruto first thought as his hunting instinct quickly moved back. However, as he was about to start moving through, he started to feel odd. Without an alarm, powerful shudders cascaded through his body, like layers of chitin vibrating on one another, and in turn, they were causing Naruto great enjoyment. Constant vibrations from his jaws showed the pleasure as his tongue were swelling. "Breeding," Naruto whispered as he felt sacs forming along his neck, connecting through his tongue. A female. Naruto's tail was wagging on his back. The female shinobi could see him immobile next to Hayate. Naruto continued to hiss softly as his tongue moved up and down the soft interior of his throat and esophagus. Toxins were pushing through his bloodstream. What is this feeling? Naruto started drooling more as he was holding on the ground. Sacs were forming along his neck. The knot egg sizes were visible as they formed. They were wriggling inside him, connecting themselves to his tongue. Naruto felt his tongue was oddly thick and sloppy. Veins were forming up along the inner jaw. It was time, however, the female shinobi was not there anymore, not in front of him, and suddenly bunch of kunais went onto his back. HSS's. Naruto hissed softly, as the tip of the kunais were melting with his acidic blood and then dropping on the floor. Naruto rolled over as he faced himself backwards, scanning the area in front of him as he moved closer and closer, and there she was, hiding on the bushes. Naruto approached her closer. Slowly, Naruto began to rise from the ground. Yugo could not help but step back as it rose on its back feet. Yugo was in awe when Naruto fully stood up. He towered at 7 feet. His body was thin, but his limbs were strong and long. His chest looked like a ribcage on the outside. Naruto's mind was strong, and he was about to find out. Naruto's crystalline shield on his face retracted, showing his face once again. "Don't be afraid." The message was loud and clear in Yugo's mindscape as she saw no words coming out from his maw. "Naruto?" Yugo spoke as she heard his message in her mind. Naruto could see her. Yugo had long straight purple hair, reaching down to her waist, warm brown eyes over a porcelain mask resembling a cat with 3 red stripes. Her curvy body meant healthy anatomy for reproduction. Desires were rushing into his organism. "I won't hurt you," Naruto whispered out as his tail remained actively moving behind him. These hormones were not just preparing for reproduction, but also preparing the victim. The thick drool that Naruto was secreting was a strong aphrodisiac now. The scent pulled her on, as she had to rub her nose no less than 3 times as she walked along. It felt so unnatural. Naruto's tongue was sticking out of his mouth. "Yes, I know you can feel the same warmth growing inside me," Naruto said as the toxins were taking place now. And, as he came closer, Naruto bent down to Yugo's level, and his hand reached out and cupped her face in its large but thin hands, gently holding it. Then suddenly, the fingers touched her mouth, and the command was clear. "Open," as it reached in her mind. Yugo slowly opened her mouth, where Naruto peeled back his thin lips, revealing twin neat rows of crystalline teeth. In an instant, the inner jaw forced itself into her mouth along with a flood of glutinous saliva which washed into her throat, making her choke. Naruto's face mandibles held his mouth in place. The talons on his mandibles were strongly attached to her head, pierced slightly onto her skull. Each thrust into her mouth made Naruto's mandibles contract over her face as his own throat flexed. Saliva went down her gullet, and she shuddered at the sweet taste of it, but kept swallowing on reflex. Naruto convulsed, and the girl's breath stopped as the first lump hit the back of her throat. The throat bulged as the gelatinous gobbet traveled down her esophagus, aided both by Naruto's new contracting muscles along his new throat, and the girl's own spasms. Yugo felt the tongue pulsate while it writhed inside her mouth and throat. She let out a cry as her throat contracted while the bulge slid down the length. Naruto continued. He did not know how many she would be able to hold, but there was no time to stop. He wanted more. He did not want to be alone in this world. Yugo's entire torso shook as her esophagus rhythmically contracted 5 times. She was loving the experience. Her legs began to shake and almost give away, but Naruto wrapped his long tail around her hips and held her up. After a long 15-minute intercourse, Naruto began retracting his tongue from her throat, occasionally spurting fluids along the way, leaving only the top section of his tongue inside. Naruto just gushed the rest fluids as Yugo greedily swallowed it all, the wad bulging down her throat, warming it as it went down. More, Yugo whispered, but Naruto ignored her plea. Naruto slowly unwound her hips, as he carefully let her be on the ground. Naruto let her be, as he moved back to the forest. He needed a hive now, a place to hide when the sun rises. Yugo was recovering from the event as she cleaned herself. The warmth was resting on her stomach, as she felt on her knees. Ah, what was that? Yugo thought aloud when she felt her stomach packed. Help! Hayate was screaming from a few meters away. Oh, Hayate! Yugo said as she licked off the drool left. Yugo ran to Hayate, as she saw him bleeding from the bite wound. She quickly grabbed a piece of clothes and pressed against the wound. In the midst of it, Hayate was shocked she had made it. Yugo? Hayate asked, surprised. You made it. Where is he? He just let me go and disappeared, she said, embarrassed of what had happened. But let's get you out of here in case he returns. All right, Hayate said as Yugo was helping him to the village. After a few hours, she took him to the hospital. Doctors rushed to examine the wound. They realized that not only the creature took flesh, but also a large chakra from Hayate's chakra channels through his arm. They did the best to heal him and recover the arm. Doctors also went to see Yugo, but they could not see anything out of the normal, so they let her go. Once she got to her apartment, and got in bed as she was taking moments to take everything in. Yugo's thoughts immediately went back when Naruto kissed her. She could still feel the tongue going down her throat. It could have been dangerous, she could have died, but she loved it, and she wanted more. There was no control, but after being exhausted, she fell asleep. Yugo entered a vivid dream. She was in a dark place with fog. But for some reason, she could see. Appearing from the cloudy fog, she saw Naruto again, standing in a more human fashion. He was naked but with a black exoskeleton covering his chest, covering his crotch, partially his arms and legs. Naruto? Yugo wondered. Is this a dream? She said as Naruto came closer. Is it? Naruto said as he came closer to her. You drank deeply of me and now I can see through you, feel through you. You liked when I fed you, Naruto smirked. I can give you way more than that. Naruto said as he was caring for her face, going over to her with his human hands. What are you? Yugo asked. King. Naruto said as he came closer, hissing as he cupped her face with his slender fingers. Naruto moved his fingers down her neck before gliding over her ass. Meanwhile, Naruto was in the forest, holding back his body above the soil with his clawed limbs. The membrane covered the top of his face as he was communicating through Yugo's mindscape, keeping her warmth as his eggs were maturing inside her. As the connection subsided, Naruto came back to himself, and there was no time. It was about for sunrise, and he needed to find a safe place to hold his hive and colony. Away from the light and deeply with the darkness. It had to be humid and muggy, as well as warm. Naruto let himself fall once again from the height of the tree, and began to leap from tree and tree, scanning the forest floor. Something dark, something humid, Naruto thought. Through the forest, it just took a few more miles of laps and running to find a cave within the forest. The hole was underneath a massive tree, almost hidden through the bushes. Naruto scuttled into the darkness to explore. For quite a while, Naruto was crawling around a long rocky hallway. By now, his night vision kicked in, adjusting himself. As Naruto moved through the end of the passage, he reached out to a larger chamber. A beam of light shone through a large crack in the ceiling. And in the middle of the floor there was a large underground pool. The beam shot through the lake, revealing its crystal clearness. Naruto continued as he was walking through the shallow pool, and then he saw the beginning of another passage at the other side of the room. It was another long hall, so Naruto scuttled as quickly as he could. Having reached the end in seconds, Naruto surveyed the next room. This chamber was cozier. Several more beams of light lit the room through the roof. Hatchery. Naruto whispered out as Naruto jumped out to the wall, crawling, familiarizing to the place. Suddenly, his drool changed once again. This time it was not an aphrodisiac, it was something thicker. It was some unique form of resin. Naruto spit out with his tongue onto the walls. It was instinct to cover the whole place. He will not have resting. The cozy area must be covered entirely in preparation for his hive. In the morning, Yugo woke up from her deep dream in cold sweat. Her uniform stuck to her chest as she took in deep breaths. She looked at her alarm, and she was late for her regular trainings. She felt horny still inside her, but what was different was what happened inside her. She moaned quietly when she felt them. There's something inside. Yugo moaned as she rubbed her belly, it was swollen. Writhing as bumps surfaced and disappearing as alien bodies pushed out her flesh. She had to put it together, so she got up and took a warm shower to prepare herself, rubbing her belly, cleaning herself deeply, as she then took the towel and got prepared for her trainings. She was indeed late, but she had to go towards the training. Over the way home, Yugo found that her love for Naruto did not subside, it was him, she needed more. Soon, at night, you shall come to the hive, Naruto whispered through her mind, as the aphrodisiac inside her had been working well. Yugo knew the location she was asked to go, she could not wait. The training was wobbly, as she was trying to concentrate. Naruto's mental connection allowed him to not only listen to everything she says, but subconsciously direct or misdirect any undesirable actions. Have you seen Hayate? And Anbu asked her. Naruto's dreadlock hair got stiff as his mind entered her to listen. He has made it to the hospital from a mission last night. Yugo answered. At the same time, Naruto had just finished covering the whole hive in resin. Thick and dense resin that covered the whole place. As Naruto finished, he moved to the ceiling, covering himself with the resin as he let himself sleep finally. His tail coiled around him, as he was in the fetal position. After 4 hours, using the latent mental connection with Yugo, Naruto finds she is almost done her training. He smiles, and suggests to her to come over, she was soon to give birth. Yugo stays quiet and diverts to the forest after leaving the training grounds. People find her odd today, but ignored her. They were still wondering about Hayate, but it has only been a day. Go forth, come to me, Naruto whispered to her. Naruto was slowly awakening inside the resin, stretching his limbs as his tail uncoiled, and suddenly he landed onto the floor, rising and hissing loudly through the hive compound. Yugo was closer and closer, jumping through trees, as she then finds the cave and enters it. There were hissing sounds as she entered, but Naruto quickly grabbed her, placing resin onto her, securing her for birth. Great, Naruto said. Yugo found herself floating, suspended in nothing, perfectly still. Then she tried to move and felt the restraining resin sealed around her arms and legs. Naruto was in front of her, licking her face and carrying her. Yugo just shifted around, trying to find the most comfortable position from the tiny space she could move. Heat was pulsing through her thighs as the drones were to give birth at any point. They're like snakes, she said as she was looking around, trying to figure out what was happening. They won't harm you, they just want to be born, Naruto whispered her, as he then moved closer and kissed her once again, letting his tongue into her throat, letting his saliva into her once again as she sucked and cared for it. The sweet jelly moved down her throat as she felt energized once again, as he then pulled it away. Suddenly a gush of fluid splashed between her legs, as muscles clenched and Yugo felt a worm-like shape slithering down, then the other came, thick and fast, their sleek, smooth bodies slipping through her. They were slithering around as Naruto jumped off the resin to see them. They were 2, 3, 6. No, they were more, they were 12 in total. Hiss, Naruto hissed, he was no longer alone. Naruto felt them, as if they were part of him. Naruto could still speak with them. They were his and they were born to kill, to hunt, to feast. Their language to him was submissive, their message was loud and clear, even though they were not speaking words. I want more, Naruto hissed. Expansion of the hive. Naruto jumped again onto the resin walls, and moved over to Yugo, coming above her. She could see Naruto's mouth smiling, bearing his opening his dark maw. Naruto's mandibles clenched tight around Yugo's head, holding her in place. The talon ends were digging into her skull, matting her hair with slime. Yugo could glimpse of the inner mouth starting to emerge as it went back down her throat. Yugo could feel every little ridge that adorned Naruto's tongue as it began thrusting its organ from the back of her mouth and into her esophagus. Her neck visibly distorted each time. Naruto's engorged sack-like organ on his neck began beating, pumping its contents up into his esophagus. Yugo felt the knot flowing down her gullet, disappearing into her body once again. Each pulsation of his tongue pushed the knot further down the tongue's length. Yugo did nothing but moan as Naruto continued impregnating her until after several minutes, he retracted his tongue. Yugo felt the source of her pleasure leave her mouth, disengaging his strong mandibles from her face when it returned into Naruto. Yugo looked at Naruto one more time, thick fluids dribbling from her lips before falling unconscious, her head limply hanging over her shoulders. Naruto cared for her and produced resin to keep her head attached on the walls, as he then saw around. The newborns were growing into humanoid shapes, characterized by their biomechanical skeletal appearance, covered on a black chitinous hide, ribbed sides, double ringers, and a segmented tail like Naruto's, but the end was not a blade but a barbed tip. Nevertheless, they were children still, not ready yet for hunting until a few more hours. One of the firstborn hissed as the newborn moved over to the resin walls. Their skulls were cylindrical and elongated, their mouths were fang-filled, and they also had ridged sheaths along their forearms. They were growing female as their chests were growing two rounded half protected by the exoskeleton. Their curvy body made them more agile but also more feral. "My drones," Naruto smirked. They started to hiss around the newly found cave. They were hissing as they grew. They hissed. They were moving around, experimenting with their limbs as they moved to the resin walls. Some curled up and rested as they let themselves grow. Others were impatient, they moved Naruto's larger body, licking and moaning. Naruto moaned too as he could them, slowly coming into the hive mind. Naruto stroked the drone's domed head, as they were hissing and releasing their tongues out. Naruto could feel their urges of blood, they wanted to feed. Others went to Yugo, as they knew they need to feed her and care for her, as she is their host mother. "Grow strong," Naruto hissed. A light fog floated along within the forest, owls hooted on the trees, and then a burst of newborn drones rushed through the forest. They were small, the size of regular domestic dogs, and they were hungry and desperate to grow. Naruto was behind them. As he got out of the cave, he leapt to the first tree he saw and then moved through, getting closer to the village. In the forest, there were small and large animals that were getting devoured, and by every bite, the drones grew and formed into their adult form. It only took them a couple of hours to develop fully into the adult drone. The exoskeleton was growing on their sides, as their tail matured, and their barbed end grew longer. One of them hissed as the others echoed it through the forest in a series of growling sounds. In a few hours, puberty was reaching them as their voluminous developed underneath the exoskeleton. Soft belly, smooth inner thighs, and a face that was half covered by a smooth rounded dome that swept along the top of their skulls. From their succulent lips, fangs were dripping saliva as they moved deeper into the forest. Hosts, hunts, their minds were echoing as they were clear on what needed to be done. Even though their bodies were attractive, they were exceptionally hostile and avid predators. One of them was watching a male ninja moving through, as she followed him, as she then moved faster and moved above him. He was looking at a map to see where to go next, and at that precise moment, she pierced her tail through his chest. Raising his body up to where she was, as he then looked at her face, it was too late. She propelled her inner jaw as it crushed his skull, and then she devoured him, biting and feasting. "Azumo, where are you?" The voice echoed as the drone hissed softly, taking the corpse up to the trees and hiding it. After a few more leaps, other drones diverged to cover more surface area as one of them appeared in front of a female shinobi. The tail was right above the drone, ready to splash her in acid if she did any bad movements. The drone was looking at the human. She was tall, and her thick blonde locks cascaded down over her broad but feminine shoulders. The drone was just hissing at her, swishing her tail behind. Why is it waiting?" she whispered as she was holding her kunai. In exchange, the human girl just backed out, and then she threw a couple of kunai to the drone. The drone ducked them with ease as the drone moved closer to her. The human slowly backed out, then the drone stood up, her body trembles, her tail wagging, and her push against her exoskeleton. The creature was evidently a female one. Even her otherworldly aspects, her elongated head, tubes, claws, and bladed tail do not detract from her beauty. What is this? The human shivers. The drone shudders as thoughts flow through her mind, as it was instinct to gather female hosts for the hive. Her body trembles, as she then launches to the ninja once again. The drone slashes her claws over her, and then she bent, letting her tail out to splash acid over to her. The ninja does her best to avoid the claws, but some of the acids landed on her clothing, burning it quickly. HSS's, the drone hissed as the drone could see partially the S of the human. The female took off her clothing before the acid burned her skin, and grabbed the blade to face the drone again. This time, the drone launches to the soil, moving quickly as the drone moves her tails, making the human fall, and then launches at the female by biting her neck. The bite was deep, and what the drone did was inject her with her venom. Ag, damn, let me go, as the female human. Then the human felt as the creature grasped her supple S, as the viscous drool warmed her skin on contact. The pheromones were making her body heat up as she began to yearn for the drone's touch. The drone continued to move her hand down her abdomen, and down to her crotch as she used her fingers to measure how well the human responded. Meanwhile, the human felt the drone's face brush against hers one more time before her maw hovered over her lips. "Ah," the human moaned. The drone's mouth opened, revealing its thick tongue, tipped with its own miniature jaw. The human moaned lightly as the tip pressed against her soft and lush lips. The tongue's jaw extended, spreading her lips just so that it was wide enough for the rest of the length to enter her. The drone's drool entered deeply in the human's body, making her moan into the creature's tongue. After some minutes, the human was lost in the gaze of the drone, and the creature began to remove the remainder of her clothing. The drone let out more of her drool over to her body, covering some of it, restraining her arms and legs. Making sure the human was in a fetal position before she grabbed the human and placed her on her back. HSSS's, the drone moaned loudly as a response to capturing a human host. One of the drones grabbed her on the back as the dorsal spines moved and grabbed the human tightly. Once tightly on the back, the exposed skin was facing the drone's back while the covered skin was exposing the exterior. From the outside, it looked like a lump on her back without determining it was a human or not. Somewhere else, in the middle of this, Naruto was also out and about. His larger body was hung on a tree watching the forest floor, following paths of humans nearby. Naruto moved down, falling into the shadows between the bushes and looking at the tracks. They were fresh, the pheromones were still strong, and of them appeared to be one that of a female. Grr, Naruto growled softly as he continued moving through the forest. As he leapt again on a tree, and then followed a while longer, and then he found the hue as his vision clarified it. It was two, and one of them was female. Naruto approached closer to them, and he found there was another group coming in as well. There were 3 more humans. As Naruto landed closer to them, he was able to see them clearly. One of them had a long sword on his back. He was the tallest of all of them, and next to him was the female, long hair with a green kimono. Naruto then sensed the other 3, they were from a different village. Naruto did not want to engage just yet, he wanted to know what they were up to. Down on the forest floor, the guy apparently was Zabuza and Haku was the girl next to him. They were meeting a gang, some sort of deal. As Naruto was listening in, he learned that they wanted Tazuna dead so a bridge could not be completed. The bridge would kill the gang's import-export business. There was also an army of mercenaries and thugs to harass the population to make sure a bridge never crosses their minds. Naruto wanted to learn more. He wanted to reach out and go to the Wave Village, which is where this bridge was being built. Naruto wanted to feast on the gang's members, as they should provide plenty of food and hosts. Naruto moved back, and a drone was assigned to follow them within the forest boundaries. In seconds, the drone arrived. She reached out as she was looking at Naruto with lustful expressions. Naruto could sense some of it, but he was still in control, so the drone moved her sight from him and into the 2 humans. Naruto ordered not to kill and not to engage, even though the drone really wanted to take the female ninja. In the village, after some time, some scientists were successful in their mission to take samples from the crate during the day. The matter was mostly out of this world, but from the hole in the resin, they could find human DNA and several strains of reproduction cells. The gooey white fluid along the resin was the beginning of a single cell that is to divide rapidly. Danzo found that when mixed with female human DNA the cells would multiply, but in the end, they would die as they needed something else. This is so odd, but something or someone must have started the cycle, and we need to find who, Danzo said as he was walking down his lab. Everything was kept secret as they would not want to alert the Hokage or the village. Who was in contact with this? Danzo asked, and he was told there was one ninja who survived the encounter. We need to monitor, Danzo affirmed. Later, Danzo found one of the ninjas who survived the encounter with these creatures. He was interrogated heavily in the secret lab, and Danzo found that Yugo was with him, and she began to act oddly right after the encounter until she got missing. When they searched their apartment, her bed was soaked with odd sticky fluids, and they easily determined that these fluids were partially out of this world, matching the crate DNA. She was contaminated with very strong aphrodisiacs. We need to research further? We need to capture one of these creatures, Danzo said as he moved back to the entrance of the tunnel. At the other side of the forest, Naruto was holding tightly on the tree as he then jumped out to the soil. As he was walking on his hind legs, the thought of being closer to the village sparked something in his anatomy. The crest on his head retracted back. His tail pushed back through his human spine, reverting. His bones were breaking as he was turning into a more humanoid body. The crystal black membrane retracted back into his skull as his face reappeared again. Ah! Naruto moaned in pain, as his black eyes formed slitted golden pupils. His exoskeleton retreated, revealing his white human skin. However, major exoskeleton structures remained on his chest, arms, and thighs. His crotch was also covered by the black exoskeleton, showing off a slit in the middle of his crotch. The fingers retracted, showing again his 5 fingers on each hand. He was basically naked, just covered by the exoskeleton on his chest and crotch. Naruto felt a bit more human as walking seemed how it was before he was reborn. Naruto walked and jumped through the forest as he used to when he was human. His dreadlock hair was bathing his back as he moved through the forest. Naruto aimed at the village. Nonetheless, a pair of drones were chasing him. Their S were bouncing underneath their exoskeleton as they leaped tree after tree. They were also very horny. An unbearable heat rushed through their bodies as they felt the king moving closer to them. Fluids were oozing down their thighs, and their smell was arousing them further. The void between their hips was too much to bear as their tails raised to expose the needy slit to the forest. HSSs, they both hissed. They were fully grown drones. Naruto stopped and fell to the soil, waiting for them to come. He was still in his human form though. Meanwhile, these drones were flagging their tails, smelling their king. They were drooling at the sight of him, hunkering down in a narrow glade. Naruto could smell them. The smell was different from when they were young. Suddenly, the 2 drones appear in front of him. They both hissed loudly at him, claiming their king back, not the mere human. So, they rose and stood up. Naruto could see the evident female. Their S pushed themselves across the rib cage exoskeleton. Their butt was expanded as their chitin armor allowed them. Their skin was black, and their thighs were wet. Naruto did not know what to expect until he smelled the pheromones deeply. The aroma was abrasive at first, then it became smooth, warm, and pleasant, something to crave. Tendrils of their juices twined up his nostrils and wrapped his brain up in soft cotton wool. Pressure began to build up in his body. So these are my drones, Naruto said softly as the drones began moving in circles around him. No need to fight it, you can't leave without treating us, the drones hissed. Drown in lust, one of the drones hissed. Spontaneously, one of them launches at his back, as she folded her body down on him until her S were resting on his midriff. Long, skillful fingers touched, prodded, and flicked his crotch. Then, she bit on his thigh, pushing venom into his body, rushing as much as she can while holding tighter around his neck and waist. Ag! Naruto roared. His nerves twitched and misfired like badly insulated power cables, all a result of the venom coursing through his veins. That was when the other drone came closer to him, launching at his back and gently kneading his back and shoulders, as Naruto felt the wetness coming out of her as she teasingly humped her back. Meanwhile, the first drone let his thigh go to his second one, pushing further venom into him. Naruto could feel the soft pressure of the S on either side of his spine and then the wet feeling as they squirted his skin. Naruto could feel the warmth coming through his body as the sensation made him remember when he was in the egg encapsulated. In moments after, Naruto fell asleep. One of the drones collected him on her back, as they both went back to the hive. The other drone moved through the forest, hunting. At dawn, Naruto was waking up, finding himself pinned to the same wall at the back of the hive. His dorsal tubes were aligned to the resin. His legs were spread out, as he was in his monstrous form. Drones were moving along the walls securing and feeding 4 females. They were busy last night. Naruto attempted to move, but then drones moved over to where he was. One of them came from above him, presenting her musky petals. Digging her claws in, she forced him to her. After a few months. It had been 6 months after Naruto's disappearance. Several corpses have been found along the forest. Most had their skull crushed through. Others had their chest crushed by thick objects. Several Anbu were sent to investigate, but just some returned alive, and with no clues on what could have happened. No one knew about Naruto or the creatures he held as his new family. On the present, at dawn, Naruto was resting on the sticky hive floor. From there he could see how the host mothers were pinned to the walls. A drone came down to Yugo's face, as she opened her mouth fully and invaded Yugo's lips with a gently, but the firm thrust of her inner jaws. The incredible length now galvanized into lusty motions pushing nutrients into her. Yugo accepted the drone's tongue deep into her throat. On the other side, drones crawled on the sides of the wall, as they began drooling profusely into their hands, slathering the sticky globs across the newest host mother, first pinning her arms onto the walls. Their drool soon hardened into a translucent resin. One curious hand reached up to grasp one of her s. The ninja elicited a soft moan as her mound was squeezed gently. The other drone grinned in satisfaction from her reaction before putting the final touches on the resin. It spread her legs open before pinning them down. She was exposed like the others in the hive. Naruto, who was down on the floor, was almost 7 feet long in his monstrous king shape, while drones were taking care of him before he was set to fulfill his duty. Juices dribbled from them, venom formed in their fangs. One drone slashed across Naruto's chest with a sudden sweep of her long black claws. They were sharp like knives, some slightly acidic blood oozed up from the cuts as they healed. Her tongue against the wounds, tasting the king's blood. Naruto writhed and squirmed, but he could not escape. "You never get me time to rest," Naruto moaned. Another drone hurled it aside, squashing her s against his chest, as her hand knew where to go. Then the third drone came down, and moved to his crotch, coiling her tongue around, leaning forward. Naruto felt the blood surging. Before Naruto could make any noise, the fourth drone came and pushed into a kiss. The more he connected to the drones, the more powerful he was becoming. His crest was thicker, and the bladed tail was longer. He was also forming a venom of his own as the acidic glands on his tail grew larger. "I can't wait until we can break free from this forest," Naruto whispered in desire around his 40 drones and counting. Meanwhile, all this happened, the remainder of the drones were working on a new egg. The egg was based on Naruto's and drones' fluids mixed and fermented. The egg resonated and shuddered. It was carrying the queen hip-hugger inside, as it was aiming to find a suitable host to along Naruto's side and to lead the drones along with him. The drones perfectly pushed the sticky substances around it. However, the egg has not found a suitable host for the creature inside. It has been difficult. Even though he has hunted and collected more than 30 females, and there were more than 50 drones and counting in the hive. Soon we will break free. We will find her," the hive mind replied their king back. Outside the cave, the forest was turning busier than before. There were preparations of what was to come. Chunin exams. There were more movements around, and even though the hive was more active during the night, there were a few drones here and there observing, and their vision was directly sent to Naruto. Even at the busy time he was in, the presence of the hive in his surroundings was never disturbed. The drones were studying, watching. The drone was watching a young redhead boy and 3 ninjas. Out of those 3 ninjas, one of them was female. One threw her umbrellas onto the sky. A million needles went down. Some hurt the drone, but the acidic blood melted the metal into her bloodstream. Gaara defended himself with a massive amount of sand covering him up. Gaara was angry, so he performed a jutsu that rose them up and killed them with the pressure of the sand. In that instance, Gaara saw the creature, her natural black chitin exoskeleton, her long elongated head. Her face had no visible eyes. Gaara could see the creature had 8 pointed tube-like protrusions that stuck out. HSS's. The drone hissed at him. Kill him. Naruto yelled as one drone in the hive grabbed his head and continued to kiss him deeper. They were vicious and Naruto was merciless. As the drone launched from the tree, he landed on Gaara and attempted to slash him as the sand barely was matching the drone's speed. Then, from her tail, acid splashed onto Gaara, making Gaara use more sand to defend himself. The acid was very corrosive. Suddenly, a second drone emerged, pouncing onto Gaara, as the sand was trying to keep up with the speed of the first one. "They are fast," Gaara said as he raised his arms. He was forming a triangle with his hands, and the little left sand pushed one of the drones and coiled around her. In this thread, the two drones released further puddles of acid on the soil where Gaara was standing, breaking his jutsu, and when it happened, the two jumped out to slash him alive, eating the flesh that Gaara never had. The more they bit, the more sand came to heal him. The late afternoon sun flooded the busy forest. The sunlight was washing over the soil with ninjas fighting to earn the Chunin qualification. Sakura was walking by Sasuke and Sai. She was remembering when Anko gave the introduction to this stage of the exam. The Forest of Death was infamous for recent disappearances. Corpses were found with holes in the skulls and stab wounds on their chests. Some were found with corroded skin, and then, more importantly, most female corpses were missing. Up to date, there were more than 7 disappeared females from nearby villages. Sakura was terrified, while Sasuke and Sai were calmed. They were walking through the forest, as drones watched them. Fortunately, for the drones, they were chakraless, making them hard to detect. All images from the drones were shared amongst the hive mind. There were not many drones out there, as it was still the day. Sakura recalled it was at night when it was most dangerous. Sakura had a sketch of the creature. One of the few survivors, Hayate, did the best to describe it. Sakura looked at the humanoid figure, distinctive abs and biceps, a tail, mandibles around his head, and a sheath. Nonetheless, Sakura also knew that there were other kinds, the ones with domed smooth heads, barbed tails, and distinctive female features. Would they be the disappeared females? Sakura wondered as she walked. In the middle of this, a guy with a gas mask appeared in front of them. He already got a kunai out and ready. Sasuke kicked him out before he could stab any of them. He smirked, but before he could do anything, Sasuke launched fireballs at him. The shinobi ducked them, but Sasuke jumped at him, crashing on his chest as he stabbed him with a kunai. After that, they disappeared. A drone was watching them, especially on Sakura. The drone liked her. She hissed softly as she dispersed through the forest. There were not many drones out, so it was not wise to engage. During this, the hive was asleep. Several drones were curled up, with their limbs crossed as they slept on the hive walls. Among them was Naruto. He was half submerged within the wall's resin, as 2 dome heads were between his thighs. The drones were both licking and slurping at his sheath. Naruto growled softly as he moved slightly as other drones were rushing to lick his chitinous body. Drones were naturally lustful creatures. Their purpose was not fighting, instead was to preserve and expand the hive. To nurture the host mothers, and to make sure Naruto was always up for procreation. They were hunters to collect hosts, and then to make sure they were taken care of properly. In contrast, warriors were creatures designed for battle. They were not as lustful, instead, they were vicious and energy-demanding ones. Yugo began to awake in the quiet hive. She stirred, blinking the sleep out of her eyes, when she saw one of the drones coming closer to her. Yugo could feel her belly different. The lumps grew bigger and so did her belly. The drone was watching her attentively. Suddenly, the flesh of Yugo's belly writhed and undulated with movements, shapes appearing in the tight skin as serpentine bodies forced it out in their squirming. The sounds of fluid gurgling and muffled growls and chirps were clearly audible. Other women were facing similar symptoms as drones slowly woke up and crawled to them. They were examining them. It appeared it was time. Yugo tipped back her head as far as she could as she groaned loudly in discomfort, thick ropes of muscle rubbing against the insides. She cringed as fluids splashed between her thighs. Other women experimented the same. It was already time. Contractions came, as the larva inside wriggled and pressed through her cervix, slithering out into the hive. There were 5 in total, one after another, as the other females started as well. The larvae were different. This one had an extra set of arms, made of a single sharp blade each. They were crawling, moving through Yugo's body as they reached her s. At the same time, she opened her mouth, inviting the drone's tongue in as it climbed up, practically leaning on her as it pumped the rich, sweet jelly down her throat. Underneath Naruto, on the center of the hive, the queen egg was fully formed. The drones had collected enough fluids from Naruto to complete it. The egg was 3 meters tall and 2 across. It had a dark gray outer layer parting 6 ways to reveal a fleshy, luminous pearly white fluid interior. It radiated warmth in the hive. Drones were walking around it, as the petals at the top were firmed closed. This meant the egg was not close to a potential queen. By one of the sides, there was a moist slit protected by lips-like structures. The slit was firmed closed. At the same time, the warriors were developing faster. Their S grew larger than the drones, pushing against their exoskeleton. Their dome head had ridges now instead of the drone's smooth domes. Their arms looked like the drone's arms, but above them, there was a set of 2 scythe-like arms. Some were already practicing their scythes as they moved rapidly as they fought each other, smirking in addictive vice, while others preferred a more intimate engagement. One grabbed the body of another one. As her serpent-like tongue slithered into her mouth, their actions quickly shifted and calmed. They began dancing into a full-on passionate embrace. Their tongues did not have inner jaws. The tongues were several feet long, and they were powerful enough to be used to slice into flesh. Their tongues were like whips against their opponents. For these two, their tongues continued to dance like serpents. Their saliva slinked as their bodies grew hot. In moments, they broke their tongues. Drones were already next to them, moving their tongues along their spines. Their bodies trembled as the drone's tongue navigated down the base of their tails. Then, the warriors resumed their kiss, as the drones teased their bodies, causing them to squirm and moan. Their bodies grew hotter. In their act, Naruto was waking up from his sleep. He moved his limbs when suddenly he landed on the hive floor, moaning and hissing loudly. His dorsal pincers extended up, as he felt them. His tail swished side by side. His claws had grown, and his crest was thicker than before, forming horns along the middle of it. Naruto was almost fully developed. No time to waste. Bring me a queen. Naruto echoed through the hive mind, reaching boundaries from the resin-covered walls and into the forest. His voice was profound for the hive. As the drones listened, even the young warriors. Most drones got up immediately. As they moved and shook their bodies, they reached out to the sunset and rushed to the forest. Naruto then jumped to the resin walls, as his legs and claws embedded into the resin, as his tongue came out naturally, smelling. All have given birth, Naruto thought. Naruto reached the closest one from above. As his eyeless face came down, his jaws opened wide, and his mandibles reached out to her face. The mandibles locked around her head, pulling her towards the hideous face, and the inner jaw butted against the sealed lips. Naruto pushed harder as his tongue delved down her throat. Soon, she felt the familiar pulses of the muscles in Naruto's neck pushing the squishy eggs through his tongue. As Naruto finished, the drones came after, extending their heads towards her like a lover leaning in. The human opened her mouth wide as the drone began to feed her. In the forest, the warriors hissed as they leaped from tree to tree, rushing in as they moved through the forest. Their scythes crushed the woods as they landed. In their next leaps they learned how to be more discreet. After a more leap, a warrior found a group of 3 humans. They wore an 8-note music symbol on their forehead protector. Their clothing was similar among them, with snake-patterned pants. The warrior's instincts were stronger than any other member in the hive, so she quickly jumped out to the soil. "Watch out!" a girl yelled out to one of them, as his partner was able to roll out when the warrior landed on her scythes dug into the soil. The warrior hissed as she stood up, hissing at them. Then, Kin threw 3 needle-like weapons, but the warrior quickly dodged them. Then, the warrior launched herself to the air, as her tongue propelled out, coiling around his neck, one of them pulling him closer. The shinobi tried to break free, but it was too late. As he got closer to her, her tail came through his chest. On this effect, the apparent leader of them released a high-pitched sound, causing even his remaining member to cover her ears. But they had no effect on the warrior. Her chitin body protected them from several environments, from the pure vacuum of space to the normal conditions of Earth. Therefore, she jumped over them, landing on the tree as her tail squeezed in acidic venom from her glands. The acid gave her a sense of relief through her. "Careful!" the girl yelled out as the leader dispersed. Then, the female shinobi echoed a high-pitched noise as several figures of herself showed up to the warrior. The warrior could just sense the heat and the beating of the human heart. Nevertheless, she threw her needle towards the warrior. At the same time, the human leader landed behind the warrior and punched her, but when he did he clicked his metal arm piece echoing a sound wave. In normal conditions, when the opponent is human, the water inside them would tremble, knocking them out, but in the case of the warrior whose blood is acidic and pressurized, the burst of the sound rushed through her tongue, as she then splashed acid all over. In the effect, killing him. The female shinobi barely made it out before the acid landed on her. After the mist of acid rain, the girl was backing off, as the warrior came closer to her while licking off her acidic blood from herself. "No need to be afraid," the warrior whispered on the human's mind. "You can talk?" the girl said as the warrior learned her name. It was Kin. The warrior moved quickly as she moved behind her. The scythes came down, locking the female ninja to the warrior. The warrior learned her name was Kin, and Kin could feel the warrior's humid body as the creature's S were touching her back. Once firmed around her body, the warrior jumped to a near tree. The warrior crawled with her clawed hands as she reached almost to the treetop. When they were alone, her tongue darted out. Kin could feel the warm breath from the warrior as the tip of her tongue touched her lips. The tip of the tongue pressed and rubbed her lips, until then it moved down her throat, bulging from her neck as the thick length filled her. The warrior just wanted to taste her, and after the taste, she retracted her tongue. Then, when she felt it was all over, a drone came above them and bit her neck, squeezing the venom glands as Kin was taken into the hive. At another location, a lonely drone was watching a purple-hued. Her throat was shining as she was facing a blue-hued. The drone was hissing softly at them as she was watching from behind. "It has been a while, Anko," the man said, who later was identified to be Orochimaru. "You are an extremely dangerous S-class wanted criminal," Anko said. "That is why I am going to kill you, even if it costs me my life. It is my job as your former subordinate who learned everything from you, right?" she said as she released kunais from her sleeve. Orochimaru released his tongue out with extreme speed. Anko managed to duck it, but not the second time when it attached to her wrist, pulling her. But Anko then released her snake jutsu. They all flew away to Orochimaru, pulling him over to where she was. Orochimaru was holding her, but she used that as an advantage as she managed to do a jutsu with his hand. Orochimaru glared at the hand sign. "Yes, we are going to die together," Anko assured. Regretfully, Anko realized he was not holding Orochimaru. Orochimaru was just behind her. She was disappointed. She really thought she had him. Anko was helpless. She tried to throw a kunai at him, but she failed. More drones came in, to observe and wait for the appropriate moment to take her in. As they watched, Naruto also watched. Naruto was curious about her, as she seemed different from the others. Orochimaru was coming closer to her, as she was feeling harmed. As Orochimaru was telling her about the plans to kill the Hokage, but Orochimaru said he didn't have enough people to do so. Anko was feeling more harmed, as she was struggling to breathe. She fell on her knees as Orochimaru came closer to her, telling her, "He will die, as usual," Anko said. "There is only a 10% chance he will survive, and who knows, he might be like you," Orochimaru said. "Are you jealous?" Orochimaru said while touching her face. "Are you still angry that I used you, and cast you off like trash?" Orochimaru laughed as he walked away from her, and then disappeared. Anko was helpless, and that was when several drones came towards her. She saw their elongated heads, as they were hissing softly at her. Anko noticed how their bodies had the side of a feminine look, their S pushed against their exoskeleton as they dropped quadrupedally. The drones moved to see their wound, as the drone spit resin against it to stop the bleeding and heal her. The second drone moved closer to her body, cutting through her clothing slightly, as a hand reached to her. "What the hell are you doing?" Anko said. However, a third drone came behind her, biting her neck as the drone's venom glands pumped its pheromones into her body. The fluid rushed into her body, as it raised temperature. Until then, her consciousness faded away. The drone took up her legs and banned back, cradling the unconscious and in its lanky arms as the drone returned into the departments of the hive. Warriors and other drones had shown this one the way to avoid enemies. In the hive, Naruto had finished impregnating the last one, and once their host mothers were performing, Naruto jumped out and landed on his feet as he moved out of the hive. His tail was swishing side by side as the massive resin wall began to open slightly just to let Naruto leave, but keeping all the pheromones, warmth, and humidity inside. Once at the bottom of the cave, Naruto crawled on the ceiling and moved over to the edge, and then leaped from tree to tree, scanning the floor. Most drones and warriors were out there. Naruto could feel through the creatures he had fertilized and given birth. He was taking pride in his army. There was no doubt they were the most amazing and sublime beings to ever walk the earth. However, whenever one dared to touch them, it caused him to angry. There was just one human who was close to killing one of them, and that was Gaara. Naruto rushed through, moving through as the hive mind could feel his anger. Most warriors hissed at the feeling, as they became more engaged in their battles. The drones pushed deeper their tongues into the host mothers, and their lust increased from the anger of their king. Naruto jumped out from the trees, and moved quadrupedal on the land, jumping once again until he was near to Gaara. It would only take a few more leaps, and when he landed in front of him. "So, you're their leader?" Gaara smirked. This caused Naruto more anger. Naruto roared as his inner tongue came out and his four mandibles stretched out. Naruto was 7 feet tall. He was bulkier, heavier built, as his dreadlock-like appendages were long from this crest. His dreadlocks were sensory organs, like whiskers. His sheath was thick, jutting from his crotch as his tail was shaking until Naruto jumped over to him. As Naruto was in the air, his arm blades grew out rapidly to stab him, but Gaara lifted a sand wall that hardly stopped the blades, as the tips were almost onto him. Naruto rolled around as his tail came out underneath Gaara. Once again, Gaara blocked it with the sand. As a result, Naruto released acid from his tail. Gaara rolled over, as Gaara lifted a sand copy of himself, which then hit Naruto on his back. Naruto smirked as his dorsal pincers crushed the sand figure. Gaara was surprised. Naruto then rushed in front of him. Naruto slashed his claws over to him, digging onto the loyal sand of his. Then Naruto bent down as the tail propelled to him, but the sand stopped again, but the tip as Naruto squeezed his glands, releasing the acid bath onto him. In that instant, Naruto rolled over, slashed him with his claws, and bit him. Gaara rolled over in pain on the soil. Marks of Naruto's teeth were on his skin. "That was not bad," Gaara murmured. Gaara raised on his knees, as almost all of his sands came out from the barrel. The sand was forming a protective ring around him. Then, Gaara shot his sand to Naruto, but he quickly moved over. Gaara was having trouble catching his speed. Then Naruto jumped over and let his tail out, as it coiled around his torso, pulling him closer as he then kicked him out of his protection ring, pushing him out a few yards. "Gaara!" Kankuro yelled out. "We need to help him," Temari suggested. Gaara stood up, but Naruto launched himself to the soil, propelling quadrupedal as he then jumped out of him. His arm blades came out, slashing him, and then biting him. Gaara was immobile as Naruto was on top of him. However, something was happening. Gaara vanished in the sand, and he reappeared. The sand was covering him completely. Naruto walked around the circular shape. Naruto launched at it, and then the sand grew out spikes over, somewhere thicker enough to penetrate his chitin, leaving him bleeding with acidic blood. Naruto backed off as the wound was healing himself. "Interesting," Naruto echoed through the minds of the ones near him. "Oh, did you hear that?" Temari asked Kankuro. He nodded. Naruto moved quadrupedal around this shield of Gaara, hissing as he was strategizing. Roaring softly at the opponent. Kankuro and Temari knew that this was the ultimate Gaara's defense. It was very hard to break. Naruto was sensing through his dreadlocks. He was focusing on chakra rushing through each grain of salt. The whole hive knew Naruto was in despair. Their king was not fighting, he was not feasting. Few drones closer to him jumped over. They were shaking as they moved to him. Naruto hissed at them to let them know this was his battle, and his alone, but the drones ignored him. They still came closer. Gaara was sensing curiously to see what this was about. The two drones jumped over to Naruto, on each side of him. Their claws dug deep to keep attached as their inner jaws rushed and crushed his chest. "Ag!" Naruto moaned in pain as their tongues reached to his chest, and then they penetrated his skin further. Lumps were forming from the drones' necks as their muscles constrained, and then they injected something into him. Naruto could feel the burning fluid rushing through his veins, as mutations came after. Naruto rushed and moved faster around. The drones were fully attached, their tails coiled around Naruto's tail. Their barbs penetrated the base of Naruto's tail blade, causing an immense amount of pain. Naruto roared. More acid was rushing through him as new glands were forming. No, no, Naruto then moaned in sadness. The two drones were dying off. All of their blood was rushing through him. Naruto could feel their lust as his sheath began to constrict and tighten. It began to quiver and bulge as the tip emerged. Naruto groaned as his organism pushed it back inside, where it belonged. However, that was not it. His tail blade was growing thicker as two new glands formed. The tip of his tail enlarged as the whole blade grew. Naruto stopped moving as he then released the acid. This time it was thicker than before, and it came out crushing Gaara's wall, leaving a hole. The drones vanished as their chitin broke into smaller dried pieces. What is happening? Naruto murmured as his dorsal sharp ends were deranging, making the barbed tips like darts. Naruto could feel the rising pressure inside. He accidentally let one of them shoot out, as it went through the sky. Another one began growing up. However, the battle was far from over. Gaara was changing, and the beast within him was taking control. Gaara was bleeding. For the first time in a very long time, the demon was unleashed, and the shield disappeared. He is wounded, Tamari said in shock. I will kill you, Gaara said as he was in psychosis. The demon was taking more and more of Gaara. The sand became a thick hand that went to Naruto, holding him in place against the tree. A tail grew out of Gaara, as thick as his sand arm. The sand was squeezing Naruto, but he released more acid, making the sand loose as he jumped out. Gaara's tail came right to him, but Naruto walked on it, as he launched his new pincers through. They got stopped by Gaara's sand. Yes, come, come, Gaara moaned in pleasure. The sand now covered Gaara's face, as his fangs grew longer, and his eyes darkened. The sand continued and covered the top half of his body. Naruto engaged once again, but a sandstorm came his way, slowing him down. Then, Gaara threw projectiles of sands to him, and even though Naruto spit acid from his tail, it was not enough. Some came to him and cracked his chitin as it regenerated once again. Naruto moved rapidly, as he pulled his darts out of him. His tail released the thick acid as he bathed them with it. All that was happening while he was dodging his attacks, and then when he was closer to him, he stabbed it to him. Naruto took the chance to spit the remainder of acid he had left to then kicked him, and then bit him, reaching to his skin, as he then finally stabbed him with his two arm blades. Gaara, Kankuro said when Gaara then fell to the forest floor. In the meantime, Sasuke was reaching where they were. Sasuke wanted to also face Gaara. Sasuke could only see the falling wounded ninja until then the creature came after. Naruto let out his propelling tongue crushing through his skull, as he then bit his head off. Sasuke backed out, as he was disgusted with such a gore scene. Naruto hissed loudly as he then moved and saw Sasuke. Who are you? Sasuke said in fear. This creature had just killed the opponent that almost kills him. Naruto let his tongue out as he licked parts of his body off the blood, and then the crystalline piece on his head pushed out, revealing the top of his face. Dark green veins were on his pale skin. Black tubes penetrated his eyes' sockets, several of them as they squirmed into his brain. Nevertheless, that was Naruto's face. Lastly, there was a chitinous exoskeleton that parted halfway through his face, separating his human face from his jaw. Naruto? Sasuke said in awe. Naruto raised up, as he saw him with his pure pitch black eyes. Naruto had no way to speak with him through his mouth. Therefore, Sasuke felt the presence coming into his mind. A strong presence, and then it became a voice. It is me, Sasuke? Naruto said he was finally standing up, with his tail spontaneously moving above him. The blade was now 3 feet long, with several glands at the base. You are the forest monster, Sasuke said in awe. Naruto rushed at the word monster and grabbed him. His fingers were different, as he now had 4 instead of 5, and the middle 2 were significantly larger than the other 2. The long fingers curled all over Sasuke's head, as the 2 thumbs grabbed him by his cheeks. We are not monsters, Naruto echoed in his mind. I have been reborn, I have been accepted, into a new life, Naruto said as he then roared loudly in Sasuke's mind as he threw him off a few yards. 2 warriors jumped out, as their scythes were shuddering and then a high-pitched hissing came from them. Sasuke was scared, but Naruto was holding them back. Then, one of them dropped to the soil, licking the blood of Naruto's chitin. "I have no intention to feast on you, Sasuke," Naruto said as his crystalline membrane came back, covering the top of his face. The pressure was building up between the crystalline membrane and his skin, keeping him moist inside. Naruto shook his head Naruto then jumped to the trees and disappeared. Drones were desperately calling him to the hive. At that moment, Sakura reached Sasuke. He was still in shock, but then she saw the corpse of Gaara. Sakura moved out and took Sasuke out of there. As Naruto leapt from treetop to treetop, he could see through the drones in the hive. Anko was there, and not only that, but the egg finally opened its petals. As he moved through the forest, the drones were carefully placing her inside the egg, as the bath of fluids bathed the nude of her body. Anko was awaking inside the pod, as the warmth was feeling too good for her to worry. The soft, alien flesh of the egg's inner wall brushed against her bare body. She stifles a moan. The tendrils writhing against her skin were analyzing her, as the pod closed above her. When Anko regained consciousness, she was hearing the hive mind as a far-distance noise. The hive mind was subsuming her and taking what it wanted, picking through her thoughts and memories, probing at the very core of her being. Then, Anko could see a figure through the egg walls, as her body was moved in such a way she saw everything upside down. Her mouth was aligned to the slit on the side of the egg, as her legs were facing the top of the pod. Naruto was reaching closer, as he jumped to the top, crawling onto the walls and the host mothers, as he then dropped from above and on the egg. The massive weight gave a swish to Anko. Naruto was aligning his body to the egg, as he then made connection. Over the forest, the night was about to end when Temari and Kankuro were collecting Gaara's corpse. They were mourning their loss. His body was broken as several punctured stabs were distinctive and acid was still melting the soil beneath. Nevertheless, amid this, a couple of warriors came down, while drones were behind watching lustfully. "RRR," the warriors roared as they circled them. Kankuro and Temari were back to back, facing the warriors as they did not know when they would strike. In a second both went towards them. Their scythes crushed the wind. Kankuro dodged it, and Temari stopped it with her iron fan. But she soon realized it was about to break at any time, so she just moved the scythe at the side. Temari then backed off as she then used her iron fan, creating severe torrents of winds. The warrior grabbed herself with her claws and scythe arms. As the wind vanished, the warrior rushed and moved around the bushes and trees, dispersing so Temari could see when it was about to hit. Temari was looking around, but without realizing the hive was never alone, and a drone was already close to her. Her hiss gave Temari an alarming note to get away, as another drone came back. "No," Temari said as she realized she now had 3 against her, 2 drones and 1 warrior. The drones were drooling at her sight, they wanted her. Temari moved her iron fang, but suddenly a tongue emerged from the warrior's mouth, pulling the fan from her. The warrior bit on it and then it broke in front of her. Temari was scared of death, as the warrior came closer and ahead of the drones behind. Temari had to fight in close contact. As the scythe came down her way, she dodged it. Then she punched at her chitin body, but it was tough, so she rolled out and grabbed a kunai. Drones moved out as they watched their warrior fight. One of the drones moved behind the other, as she licked her partner, coiling her limbs around as a measure to calm her partner's nerves. The warrior splashed her acidic venom out as Temari dodged and shot her kunai, but the warrior's scythe dodged it. At the same time, Temari had to cut her cloth out to prevent the acid coming to her skin. Rapidly, Temari crawled and moved behind a tree. "How do you kill these things?" Temari panted. The warrior dropped on all 4 as she leaps to the tree, and she moved over to Temari. The warrior stood up as she then rolled herself as the tail went over Temari's leg, but Temari was able to dodge it but not the scythes emerging, stabbing her through the side of her abdomen. The warrior hissed at her, as the tongue came out, moving on her face, while drones dropped. One of them cupped her and licked her wound, as another one bit her on the neck, squeezing her venom into Temari. The warrior slowly dispersed and moved to Kankuro. When the warrior arrived, Kankuro was on his knees in front of the warrior. He was pleading for mercy, but these were merciless, and suddenly from behind, the tail stabbed him through his chest. Kankuro could see the blade as his whole body was lifted up in front of the original warrior he was fighting. Clawed hands came down his shoulders as they dug into his skin. The warrior's maw opened slightly, revealing her thin fangs, as the tongue propelled into his skull, leaving behind one more corpse. Warriors and drones were working together as quickly as they could to clean the forest. Nevertheless, Naruto did not want them to harm Sasuke and Sakura. Therefore, as they walked through the forest, they were able to collect the scrolls that those fallen ninjas left behind. They were one of the very few along with Kabuto, Hinata, Shino, Kiba, Neji to survive. In total, there were only 15 survivors, and in the hive, there were 12 new host mothers. Nevertheless, the feeling left for Sasuke was not pleasant. He felt weak, useless. Even Naruto was stronger than him, that bastard who was good for nothing and failed so many times tests and practices. After a few days of passing the Chunin exam, one evening, Sakura was waiting at the entrance of Konoha. She was afraid of what was to happen. Each hour she waited, dragged like a year. Maybe I was wrong, she thought. Maybe Sasuke is not leaving us. Just then, he rounded the corner, his backpack on his shoulders. He had his hands in his pockets as if he was just on another casual hike, but Sakura knew that this was the walk he would never return. Sasuke glanced at her coldly, his eyes were straight into her soul. Then, Sasuke left the village, in the search of power and training, however in the dreadful hands of Orochimaru. Over these days, in the hive, Anko could see the hive through the translucent egg walls. All creatures were women, their magnificent curves defying reality. Their voluptuous hung high from their chests, full and ripe. Amongst them, there was a bulkier creature coming her way. He was unbelievably ripped, his pectoral muscles defined like two slabs of slate, his bulging arms. Slime ran over his chest. Naruto was almost fully developed, as he was aiming for her. The egg almost reacted at his presence. Anko felt the sensation of the inner walls becoming tighter around her bare skin. Some tendrils grew longer and wrapped around her neck like a whip, as Anko opened her mouth in relative gasps, and it was at that moment that a thicker tentacle slams its way past her lips and into her throat. Tendrils were aligning her body, accordingly, making sure her crotch was aligned to the top of the egg, and her face to the slit at the side. Anko tried to reach out. She tries to grasp at her fleeing strength, her draining power. It is not use. Her body became hotter and hotter, as it was getting aroused. When Orochimaru had attempted to kill her off, she was panting. Not alone anymore? Naruto whispered to her. It was all dark. When Anko found herself naked, she was looking around, when she then saw him. Naruto was in full human shape. He looked older but ripped, each muscle was defined. However, her body was also transformed. Fat was gone as her stomach was flat and toned. The hive mind was taking in her suffering, her grudges and anger. They were feeding on those, as she was taken by Naruto who was vigorously thrusting her. Anko was not alone anymore. Anko was shivering from those dark memories. Naruto, she gasps. You are fine? You will be fine? Naruto said as he dropped to the floor. Around them, several if not thousands of voices came along, female, all of them representing each distant shadow of the hive mind that was slowly coming into her. Nevertheless, Anko was concentrated onto Naruto, as he was squeezing her, which gave her an intense wave of pleasure. Naruto? She moaned. Don't resist us. Let us help you so you can help us. Let's become one with the hive mind, Naruto whispered as his thumb moved over her voluptuous mass. Naruto was on top of her as her back was laying down the mindscape floor. Naruto pressed his body against hers. Naruto repositioned himself and then she felt him with her hands scratching his back, their tongues coiled together. Back in the egg, with vigorous, dominant thrusts, Naruto was fully mounted on the egg, watching her grow and grow. Anko was growling and hissed. The pressure was immense. Tendrils were wrapped all over her body. Changes were catalyzing as her skin was peeling off, revealing a hard chitinous and soft chitinous in some places. The shine of her chitin grew sleeker, stronger, darker. Kin experienced a similar connection with her hip hugger, as both became siblings and deeply connected. Kin had already killed 3, and she found herself her skirt and a skimpy outfit that covered her. She emanated a constant scent of musky sweetness that filled the air surrounding her. She walked with her hips swaying seductively with each step, and her jiggling mesmerically on the main roads of the land of sound. Her legs had pockets with several senbon, along with her bells. You're missing someone, his sister whispered as her thrust went faster. Come on, you can't hide anything from me. Arashi, she whispered in response. Let's exploit his weakness and make his will crumble. Show him to me, her sister whispered as she went deep into her, making her moans slightly into the crowd. Ah, you should stop doing that. Seem I want to meet him through your eyes, her sister whispered. I don't want to kill him. And you know I can force you. And you will love it, she whispered as her tongue swollen inside her, and her digits teased her. Kin moaned as she shuddered and then agreed with her sister, as she moved through the village, and in minutes she arrived at his place. She knocked and he answered and opened the door. He was shocked. There were news coming all over about her. Kin, but how? Arashi was shocked to see her alive and well, but at the same time he is filled with surprise and relief. Kin stared at him for a moment with a cold, emotionless expression before bursting into tears. Arash raced to her, taking her in a comforting embrace. It is okay. It is okay. I am sorry I could not find you earlier, you're back and everything's fine, Arashi whispered to her. As he hugged her, a strange scent of musky sweetness was filling in, and Arashi was unconsciously breathing it deeply, filling his lungs with pheromones. Falling into a daze, his eyes became glassy and he began to pant as his body responded to the pheromones. I missed you so much, he said. Kin, bring him out, take him out of his apartment, her sister suggested. Hey, why don't you come with me? I still feel a bit afraid of being alone, Kin whispered as he nodded. Sure, give me a minute and I'll be set, he said as he fixed quickly some clothing and got out with her. As they walked, people were watching them, as she took him to an empty store. Nonetheless, there was something that Kin realized. She was not alone in this village. As her knowledge rushed through the hive mind, a few drones came as well. You always loved him, I can sense it in you. Kiss him, the creature whispered, as she opened the abandoned place. What are we doing here? Arashi asked as he entered when the doors closed behind him. She was standing in front of him, in flesh, looking even better than before. Her strappy black top was complementing her petite and curvy frame. His pulse speeds up in a strange and somewhat way. His eyes run down her body. Kin smiles at him with a warm smile and then she brought him into a hug that happily he reciprocate. They used to date before. As she hugged him, he noticed the nice scent coming out of her, but it was too late, because she leaned in, and their lips worked together. She wraps her arms around Arashi and pulled him into the shadow of the column. Their bodies pressed tight and their lips continued to wrestle. Sink your fangs into him, do it. I care for him, why are you making me do this? Weren't you my sis? No intention to kill him, our fangs are not only for sucking blood. Slowly their lips parted and their tongues began to dance, until their kiss grew more passionate. Arashi could feel her canine teeth, they were sharper than he had expected and sliced into the corner of his tongue. Kin's eyes shot wide, glowing a bright red before her eyes turned solid black. She swallowed the blood-tinged saliva. Arashi broke the kiss, as he chuckled a bit nervously, looking at Kin. She pinned him to the wall with surprising strength. Kin gasped before she shuddered, letting her sis drive. She leaned in and nuzzled his neck with her lips. Slowly her lips widened, and she grazed her fangs along the skin. Then, the fangs punctured the skin, slicing in easily. Arashi squirmed, panting, trying to handle the pain, and then he felt the venom start to flow. It hit his blood like hot lava, pumping through his veins, circulating through his body. Part of her neck seemed to pulse as enormous venom sacs were milked. Kin shuddered softly, feeling it fill his body. It felt wrong, it felt alien, but it oddly felt good. It wasn't hurting him, the pain was numbed. Kin let him fall on the floor, as she felt a wave through her body. Arashi dropped slowly, his cheeks went numb, then his mouth, then his arms. Arashi looked at Kin with surprise as she had already taken out her skirt, showing her sister out. His vision blurred and he gazed up, seeing only the outline of her body before he collapsed completely. Kin looked at him, as she dropped and ran her hands gently up his torso, smearing his blood. Suddenly, a couple of drones began hissing from the ceiling, as she felt their presence. Kin hissed at them back, speaking their language as she wanted more time with him. However, the drones were following Queen's orders. Only one in the hive could suck the memories out of him, and that was the Queen. At the command, Kin crawled out, as she cracked her neck when her fangs returned to their normal stealth mode. She crawled towards her skirt as the creature on her waist pushed their fingers further inside. You have done well, today, sis, it whispered as she moaned while the drones were grabbing him. Meantime, Naruto and Anko walked along the path, Both were taller than before. As they spent more time in their human form, their shapes changed further. Their dreadlock turned into smooth black hair in both. Both had long black hair. Naruto's reached to his shoulder blades and Anko's reached to her waist. Their eyes were pitch black, as their lips were thin, covering their crystalline fang-like teeth. Their exoskeleton formed like thin latex-like clothing. On Naruto, the exoskeleton formed thinner on the sides of his body, as then bony structures reassembled his rib cage bones on his chest. Then the exoskeleton formed on the line of his waist, going down to cover his crotch area and his butt completely. Lastly, the exoskeleton formed behind his legs, covering his knees, and then forming completely on the rest of his legs, leaving his feet as four-toed talons. Anko's figure had grown in perfection, with her butt and hips curvaceous with thick thighs and thin waist. The exoskeleton also formed on the sides of her body. On her back the exoskeleton formed thin lines around her tendril slits, already forming 9 of them. 3 aligned one above each other in 3 columns. Each hole was dribbling fluids from her as the tip of her tendrils were emerged, appearing like large spikes. The exoskeleton moved on the sides of her body, covering partially the sides of her flat abdomen, before covering her crotch and the middle line of her butt. From there they moved behind her legs as they covered her knees, and the rest ending in high heels boots. Both were walking with one arm tangled as their fingers crossed, showing the couple they were to the world. Warriors were moving in front of them, quadrupedal like protective dogs. They were larger than them, as the warriors typically grew to 7 feet when standing. They hissed spontaneously as their tongues came out. It was night when they were walking through, listening both on their hive mind, on what everyone was doing, and after they reached further in different regions, they desired to follow Temari's steps. The village she ran into was small and vulnerable. On these thoughts, Drone rushed further and faster into the village. As they walked, drones rushed faster, propelling their back legs as they jumped over the walls surrounding the village. Behind them, a bit slower, were the warriors. It was not much when they finally reached the other side and propelled to the village that Temari was. The drones jumped over to the roofs and crawled on the walls with their swishing tails. The drones would crash on the homes, as they killed and collected females. Reports came later to the Mizakage, who was the beautiful maid Terumi. She was forced to her office as her Kiri shinobi were receiving reports from an otherwise quiet evening. Men were found with holes in their skulls, or thick stab wounds on their chest, or several smaller wounds on their chest. Nonetheless, there were also dead corpses found on the streets with thick fangs marks on their neck. Lastly, the last one with similar wounds in their neck, but with a hole in their neck completely going to their heart. What are these deaths? These are like those found in the Forest of Death, Mizakage said in fear, as these have never been reported outside. Mizakage, another ninja, came through her office. Someone is here to see you. Mei stood up when she saw her. At first she did not recognize her, but it only took her a few more minutes as she rushed through her papers. This girl was one of the missing ones in the forest. Mei looked at the post and then at her. Temari? She said in shock. Temari was crying as she moved closer to her, hugging her, with sweaty her body. Mei hugged her back as she was trying to calm her down. Mei hugged her while she commanded her deputy to call the hidden village of Konoha to provide support. At the same time, the hive knew that they needed to act quickly, and therefore, they began digging for a hive. Temari smirked as her tongue had grown tubular, and her connection with her hip hugger was deeper than ever before. Take her, sis. Now. Suddenly, Temari crawled on Mei, crossing her legs tightly around her waist. Mei was puzzled until her proboscis-like tongue emerged, ending with barbed tendrils. Then, Temari sunk her fangs, injecting her with her neurotoxin just like Kin's. However, Mei was able to stab her with one kunai she had nearby. Temari moaned in pain as she jumped over her, landing on the ceiling with her claws and talons as she got out through the window. No, wait, Mei said as some red blood drops came down the window. Temari hissed as she alerted the hive, and suddenly a drone rushed to the top of building. The drone did not hesitate as it moved over to her, and vigorously pushed her tongue into Temari's, as it thrust in fluids, pumping her throat until it pushed more jelly. As Temari was sucking on the tongue, she mewed, letting the drone push more into her. The nutrients were healing her, as she then thought she needed her weapon, her iron fan, so she can be more effective. You have done well, let King take the lead and go to your post at the Land of Sand. Anko whispered to her. Anko and Naruto were pleased to her, but she has done enough. In the meantime, the ninjas in Mei's office were taking care of her. Some of the venom did go into her bloodstream, immobilizing her. The medical ninja was also covering the wound on her neck. Her fangs went a few inches deep and almost an inch wide. Konoha was working as fast as they could while more deaths were piling up in the village. Konoha decided to send Ino, Lee and Hinata to the village because the rest were busy trying to catch Sasuke from reaching to Orochimaru. Konoha always felt the monsters in the forest were just wild animals that would never leave, so this was very unexpected for them. The hive mind was able to listen to this information as Temari was deeply related into the hive mind. Anko and Naruto decided to go faster, as they began jumping across the fields, moving then quadrupedal as her hair was lifting up on their own, while they moved faster and faster. A few miles away, at a couple miles to the village, Naruto and Anko faced a ninja in front of them. It was Zabuza. Naruto remembered seeing him in the forest once as Anko saw his memories immediately through the hive mind. Both stood up, as they were to finally speak the first words out of their mouth. "Zabuza?" Naruto said in a hissing voice as Zabuza could see the thin fangs in his mouth. "Let us pass." "Why? I can't let you in the village. Go back to where you belong," Zabuza said firmly as he withdrew his long blade. Naruto roared softly as segmented blades erected from his forearms, but just as before he jumped out to him, Anko grabbed him with her claws. She pulled him closer to her. Anko was pressing her S on his back as she moved them softly. "Let me deal with him," Anko moaned as she then grabbed Naruto's face, pulling it away from Zabuza and focusing him to her. Her claws moved around his head as she was focusing to his lips. That is when her tongue came out, pressing at his lips when both pressed their heads together, and they tangled their tongues, pushing their tongue deeper into their throats for a minute before they pulled them slowly, leaving a stream of drool. The kiss calmed Naruto down as he then jumped quickly, landing on Zabuza's shoulders and then moving past him. "Hey!" Zabuza yelled as he chased him. At the same time, Anko groaned. Her 9 tentacles were throbbing inside her body. The moist inside was intense. Anko let herself fall, as her legs were longer than her arms. Her butt was raised as her face was closer to the ground. Veins on her tentacles began to pulse in time with her racing heartbeat, as they emerged from their confines, writhing above her. Anko was feeling her claws emerge thicker and longer, as well as her talons forming bellow. Anko was pulsating. "Not so fast," Anko hissed as she leaped a few meters until suddenly her tentacles fully emerged out, coiling around his right leg. The tentacles pulled him closer to her, as he then used his sword to cut the two of them off. As they were bulged with blood, they splashed acidic blood of him as they continued their tightness on his leg. Zabuza did his best to cut them out completely until he rolled out to face her for the first time. Her 2 wounded tentacles began to regenerate, fiber by fiber, vein by vein as they emerged once again. Nonetheless, it was while Anko let her tendrils out like whips across the field, crushing the soil each time they slashed. Anko was standing up as she moved closer to him. Zabuza swung his sword, but Anko jumped to the air as she used all of her 9 tentacles to coil around him. Then, she threw him out a few yards. Anko hissed as she used her own tendrils to jump herself out to the air to where she was as she landed on her tentacles and then her feet touched the soil. Anko took a stance as her 9 tentacles coiled around her, each was slithering and pointing at him. "Who the hell are you?" Zabuza said. "Queen," Anko whispered. Zabuza threw his sword at her, but she dodged as she leaned forward to let 3 tentacles grow out of her to slash him, but as the sword came back from the air, Zabuza used his sword to block them instead of cutting them. The thing that Zabuza did not expect was the whip-like tongue of her coming and stabbing through his chest. Anko tasted his blood with pleasure as it rushed through her body as electricity. All she was fed was the sweet jelly of her drones, but she hasn't tasted blood before. Zabuza stayed back as he pressed on the wound, while he was looking at Anko's tendrils touching themselves, tangling among them, tighter and tighter. Anko did not know what was happening either. It was the first time she had them out since she gave birth. They were turning as thick as her leg tentacles. Anko lashed out wildly with her thicker tentacles. It was happening fast. They both struck and defended themselves, and struck again. Zabuza seemed to have blacked out momentarily as he was knocked to the ground without his sword. Anko had her tentacles writhing about in the air. Zabuza was terrified of her, as she then jumped at him, each tentacle stabbing his arms into the soil, and the third one holding her weight between his legs. Ahg. Zabuza moaned in pain as he was pinned on the soil. Zabuza was looking at her magnificent S hanging below her. Anko pushed her hand on his wound, as she grabbed some flesh to taste. Her tongue was tasting the rich iron flavor, as she then pushed her tongue deep into him. Her tongue was thicker than anyone's in the hive. His jawbone cracked. Anko pushed her lips to his, as the kiss killed him. "Kin, hide and wait for your queen," she said as her tentacles retracted as they turned flaccid. Anko began crawling over Zabuza until she stood up and walked a few meters before one warrior emerged from the deep woods and landed in front of her. She hissed at her queen softly, suggesting to ride her, and in turn, Anko swung her leg across the warrior's back. She leaned forward as the warrior dorsal tubes coiled around her, ensuring she was well placed. Once Anko settled, she relaxed into the back of the warrior, as the warrior began leaping across the woods. In Kirigakure, by the time Naruto appeared, the village was chaotic and full of Kiri ninjas that ignored the long-haired man walking calmly, until Naruto crawled on the buildings and his arm blades stabbed the first one on each side of his torso. Naruto hissed as crying the call of feast. While warriors were fighting, drones were digging nearby and forming a hive for him. Other drones from the main hive were digging connections to this one. The whole hive was expanding. Naruto was changing into the beast he was. His dorsal pincers came out as well as his tail, then his crest, and the rest of his exoskeleton make him grow in the 7 feet tall beast. Ninjas were throwing kunais at him, as his dorsal pincers came forward, dodging them as they came closer to him. As other ninjas came closer, he would stab them with his arm blades. More and more approach him, as then spin his body as the tail came out as the blade reached them. Naruto jumped to the roof, roaring, "Where are they taking you, Mei?" Naruto hissed in the center of the village. Underneath the forest there was a complex path of different corridors. Drones were traveling through these ones constantly. The closer the drones got to the main chamber, the more organic jelly and thick, delicious, and debilitating fog permeated through the air. The temperature was rising as drones moved further inside. Any human would be sweating at the chamber's core. Drones would reach the chamber and jump over to the walls of the main chamber, crawling through several host mothers among lewd sucking and gurgling sounds. There were several eggs lined up across the hive resin floor. The captured females were moaning and groping on the resin. Steam rose across their secured bodies on the wall as it mixed with their sweat. Drones steadily move around them, stroking and rubbing their soft S over them, moaning as they kept releasing resin out of them. Other drones were pushing their prehensile tongues deep into their throats, feeding them, giving them the necessary fluids for their nutrition. Drones panted and hissed as the host mother's throats squeezed and massaged their tongues. Several thick strands of drool quickly formed from the thrusting, and freely flowed from the corners of their mouth. At the back of the chamber, the dead ovipositor turned into a pool of thick pearly yellow fluid that formed a puddle at the end of the chamber. Drones were bathing in the deepening pool, as they sucked some in, a gulp at a time. Strings and clumps were in their mouth. Nonetheless, after bathing themselves with renewed energy, they found it difficult to keep balance as the different hormones rushed into their pressurized acidic bloodstream, keeping them gasping and shuddering. All eggs formed vine roots from them as they connected through the chamber as well as to feed on the ovipositor puddle. Inside the eggs, hiphuggers were feeding and growing inside. Among the women, there were many new ones from the finished Chunin exam. Anaho was captured, as her limbs were tightly on the resin wall. Her short brown hair was heavier with the dried fluids on them. There was also a redhead Karen. Her glasses were already lost, and since Naruto never penetrated her, he was not aware that she was an acquaintance of Orochimaru. Other women had come from crossing the forest, and there were from several villages. Among them, there was one from Konoha. Tenten was recently captured. Tenten encountered one of the drones while helping Konoha collect samples from the creatures, and she got more than she bargained for. Her sight was in Naruto's hive mind as the drones captured her, but he was busier in different activities. At the present time, Tenten could see how one of the eggs was opening its petals near her, and not long after a pale, yellow-skinned organism emerged from the egg, its many sticky and slimy fingers attempting to gain a grip on the wet folds of the egg's petal. As it emerged from the core of the egg, The hip hugger suddenly leapt as strands of amniotic fluids stuck to its body like gossamer threads as it flew through the air to Tenten's hips, clamping its fingers around her waist as its weight tail sandwiched itself between her bottom cheeks. With no reservation, the hip hugger tongue emerged from its slit on its underside and slid into her, while the tail spread and delved into her. AWG, Tenten moaned at the intrusion as she saw the creature gripping tighter on her. Her cries echoed rushed through the chamber as another egg was opening its petals, but this time, its bony fingers clamped around her head and wrapped its tail around her throat. The force of the creature attaching itself knocked her back onto the wall, making her body arch. The grip was too strong, she could not breathe. Tenten gasped as she felt two small tubes invading her nostrils. They slid further into them before reaching down her throat and into her trachea. Tenten took a breath from her nose before reaching down her throat and into her lungs. Even though she felt the creature cover all her face, she felt another organ. A tube slid into her mouth and down her throat. Like Tenten, multiple hip huggers reached host mothers at the same time. Those who got both on their face and their hips would develop warriors for the hive, but those who only got on their hips would only develop drones. Since there were significantly more eggs than host mothers, most were procreating warriors instead of drones, and this was not good, and it would cause a major impact on the balance of the hive. That is the reason Anko and Naruto were desperate to obtain host mothers. Without drones multiplying, they would not be able to feed new host mothers, or more importantly, to collect more host mothers. There were still many more eggs without women to latch on, and those would still emerge. The hip huggers would crawl on the walls as they teased the host mothers. Some few ones were a bit more aggressive. They would crush the dried resin wall and crawled inside onto their butt. These would latch on them. The long tail would curl around their bodies and coil around one of their s. These host mothers would create a new phase of the hive. This is what was happening with Karen. She was feeling the tail squeezing as it wrapped around her. She was moaning loudly as her belly was getting larger than anything any host mother had experienced before. Thick veins were pumping around her belly as she felt the single creature inside her. It was odd because typically it is several at a time. In Konoha, over several months of research, Tsunade was not able to understand what these creatures were. She was struggling in her office with documents and confessions. One of the confessions was from Hayate, the first to witness the creature. He described it as a monstrous vicious creature around 7 to 10 feet tall. He was wounded and his confession was not taken seriously given the state of mind. Then, Sakura witnessed him. Her description was taken seriously as Sasuke confirmed it in their reports during the Chunin exam. It was Naruto underneath the creature, and it was evidently a male given the sheath from his crotch, as she was describing it. They claimed he had killed Gaara brutally in the exam, and then he disappeared. Danzo and other scientists took some slime samples from the forest. This mission was carried out collaboratively with several members of Konoha, including volunteers like Tenten. Their sacrifice gave to the conclusion they were an insectoid in the sense there was hierarchy and procreation. Danzo had explained to Tsunade before, Naruto was the king of the hive, and Danzo also provided other two creatures that were identified. Eki, 1 and the soldier, 1. The Eki was vicious but inclined into hiding and flirting on females. Soldier was more robust and more inclined in combat and attack. Their blood was acidic, and given Hayate samples, they found it was highly corrosive. It had compounds not found on Earth. Tsunade was a swamp in a paper, but it was until the Anbu captain came to her office immediately. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Tsunade stood up on her desk, as she looked at him sweating and speechless. "What the hell is happening?" Tsunade said. "Ho Hokage-sama, the monsters are in Kirigakure right now." The Anbu captain said in distress. "What? They left the forest. Why?" Tsunade wondered. "Contact everyone. There must be someone who can connect with Naruto, someone who he remembers." Tsunade thought. On the streets of Kirigakure, warriors were crawling on the house walls, as they crushed the windows and killed those hiding inside. Along with the warriors, 1 or 2 drones followed their steps, hissing as they were finding females. One man was brave and grabbed one of the kunai he had. He was threatening at the warrior. The creature stood up as she hissed loudly at him with her tail stabbing him multiple times like a whip through his body. The wife was running away but the drone quickly grabbed her. As the warriors moved through the house, she crushed the roof as she leaps to the next one. Fires were emerging throughout the village. Naruto was in his beast form, 7 feet high as his dorsal pincers grew larger than before. 2 coming over his head, and 2 coming below his waist. Naruto roared, as Anbus were following him behind him as one leapt on his back, but while doing so Naruto's tail got him in the air, stabbing him on the chest as he tossed him away. It looked like if his tail had a mind of his own, but his vision was more than just human's eyes. Through his dreadlock hairs, he could sense the pheromones coming off to him. Kill them all, Naruto echoed through the hive mind. Naruto roared as his horde of warriors listened, as they got excited wiping the village off. Naruto wanted them all gone, and he wanted all the females taken to the hive, right away. Naruto then landed on the soil, his tail swishing as he saw Anbus coming his way. As one came, he twitched his pincer as it went right through them. Others threw him kunais but with his tail, he wiped them off in the air. Others just ran out of him, as he continued to move further to the tower, leaping on the walls as he continued through the roofs, moving faster as some kunais land on his chitin, staying there as he finally reaches the entrance to the tower in Kirigakure. Over the entrance, there was the Konoha's envoy, it was Iruka-sensei along with Kurenai. The two were firmed and standing up by the tower. Naruto stopped at their sight, as he changed back to his human form. The chitin was retracting as his height was turning to almost 6 feet in a late teenage boy. His tail retracted to his spine, bone by bone as it cracked into him. The chitin was retracting in a manner like fibers pulling into his body as the pale white flesh emerged. The only section that only had chitin now was his legs. His dreadlock hair was washing his body, his eyes were pitch black. Naruto coughed some resin out of him, as they could see his thin razor fangs. "It is, Naruto?" Kurenai said in disbelief. Naruto gained built more athletic with some chitin coming through the middle of his face, as the chitin covered mostly his nostrils. His hands and feet grew sharp claws on their digits. Chitin came over his shoulders and the lower belly as they represented the dorsal pincers coming against him. "Iruka-sensei," Naruto hissed as his thin lips revealed his crystalline thin teeth. Naruto saw Iruka's shocked and appalled face at realizing the truth of the rumors. "You need to stop this," Kurenai said to Naruto, as his pitch black eyes stared at her. She was slightly scared as she rose her kunai at him. Naruto was calmly walking on his bare clawed feet towards her. Naruto opened his mouth wider as his breath came out, rushing into Kurenai's nostrils as he came closer to her. His breath was fire and brimstone. Naruto grabbed her arm as the kunai dropped down. His pheromones were acting as Iruka had no clue what was happening. Naruto crashed into her, knocking her to the ground. His fangs snapped shut centimeters from her exposed throat. His fangs lunged again, almost close enough to graze her skin. Naruto was strong. Kurenai twisted an elbow under his chin and pushed up, forcing his teeth away from her throat. "So afraid of my fangs when it is my tongue they should fear," Naruto whispered as he smirked. Naruto's face was in front of Kurenai's. His smell flooded with a ravenous boundless hungering lust, as he then whispered out with words that reached Kurenai's mind. "Open as wide as you can," Naruto said as her mouth burst open straining its entrance without any sense of its control. "Let her go," Iruka-sensei said as he threw a set of kunai that landed on Naruto's back. He moaned in the pain. At the same time, a warrior nearby came forward as she coiled her tail around Iruka's body, getting tighter and tighter. The warrior hissed loudly as her inner jaw came closer to Iruka's face. He could feel her warm breath as the scythe arms were close to him. The warrior wanted to kill him at the act but Naruto was holding her back. On the soil, Naruto moaned slightly from the kunai, as black veins were rushing around the wounds as he bled acidic venom. Kurenai was taking an effort to take one of those kunai out of him and stab him. Nonetheless, Naruto's drool was already in her tongue. The strong chemicals were making her dizzy and aroused at the same time. And then suddenly Kurenai then felt a powerfully muscled tongue invading her mouth behind nectar filling her. His tongue filled her entire mouth and then plunged through her mouth and deep down into her throat. Her body jolted, flailed, and spasmed as the drool was going down her throat. In minutes, Naruto withdrew his tongue completely. "Worry not, there's more to come," Naruto said as he rose from the knees he had on each side of her body, and then he faced Iruka. Naruto pulled the kunai out of his body and tasted his own blood, and then tossed it away. The metal was already melting as his body was rejecting the metal and let it drip over his skin. Fibers were growing as the wound was healing. Naruto then moved around as the warrior was holding her scythe right up to his face. She was hissing angrily as he had dared to touch her cane. Naruto leaps on top of the warrior, licking her dome head. Naruto pulled forward as his face was next to hers, and both were facing down Iruka. He was terrified, he was puzzled at what was happening. Iruka-sensei, I am more than just Naruto. I am their king, their lover. Naruto hissed as his thick tongue came out and coiled around the warriors until their lips met. Then Naruto cut the kiss. You can't kill? This is not you, Iruka whispered. We are feasting, just like your race kills cows, we have a duty to breed. Naruto whispered as his hand went over the warriors. She really wants to kill you, but you know, she will let you go, Naruto whispered. The warrior unhinged and unpinned him, as Iruka crawled out, and moved away as fast as he could. Naruto hissed as he leapt out of the warrior. His jaw unhinged, his cheek skin stretched, and therefore his fangs were exposed up to the end of his head, reaching below his ears. His inner jaw tongue appeared from his neck as it came out. Naruto hissed, as he then moved quadrupedal, and then Naruto jumped biting him on the neck. The bite was deep as his teeth sunk, and then his inner jaw propelled into his body, crushing bones in the process. Both fell as Naruto was on his back, as he broke the bite. We will conquer, Naruto hissed, as the whole hive mind rushed with more stamina. Naruto turned into his beast form, as he then crawled the walls of the tower. His hind leg joints helped him to leap floors easily as with his claws he got enough grip. Warriors were following him behind him as he was reaching the top floor. Once there, his pincers crushed the windows and then he changed back to his human form, as he walked through the destroyed office floor. Behind him a couple of warriors followed, one ninja came by, and then the warrior on his left launched and leapt at him, killing him as she was taking his head off. Naruto came by as he was feeling Mei's pheromones hue. You are near? Naruto smirked as the two warriors were behind him. As Naruto came closer to the doors where she was, more and more ninjas came his way. Naruto dodged the attacks and he used his claws to stab them through or slash them. Blood was leaking on both arms as he continued to move further. No need to hide anymore, Naruto whispered as the warriors splashed acid on the double doors. In the woods and paths, Anko was riding a warrior as she was going as fast as she could to reach Kin and the drones. Anko was eager to finally reach the land she once lived and trained on. The warrior would leap on the sides of the trees as her dorsal tubes would tightly hold Anko along. We are close, she whispered. As they came closer, both could sense someone near. The warrior was holding tightly on the tree with her tail swishing behind her. Anko could see the pheromones hue of a human nearby, she could sense him. Anko had no time, so the warrior broke her loose, as she continued her trek to Kin and her drones. THSTA all for now. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments.